Good morning. I am so thrilled to hear the beautiful sounds of David Oliver on the pipe organ here in the Martin Luther King International Chapel, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please give him another round of applause. Welcome. This is a very, very, very special day for Morehouse College and for the National Association of African American Honors Programs. My name is Leah Krike, and I am the chair of the English department and director of the honors program here at Morehouse College. But I have a special distinction this year in 2017 because I'm the national president of the National Association of African American Honors Programs. And you all have honored me by coming to Morehouse College and to Atlanta for the 26th annual conference. Our Crown Forum is a time-honored tradition that we are sharing with you today. You will have in the audience Morehouse students who must take Crown Forum before they graduate. And this is where they hear inspirational messages and get to reflect on their academic careers. And I wanted the delegation of NAAAHP to experience that with us. So I would love for those of you who were able to get here from NAAAHP, because I know you've traveled far, we have over 400 members coming, but I would love for you to please stand so that that the Morehouse students and faculty can see our members of NAAAHP. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Our Crown Forum is a class period as well. So we have to do this in rapid fire fashion. We won't be able to linger long at the podium to talk. But you'll get to know a little bit more about our organization, NAAAHP, and how it was founded right here at Morehouse College 26 years ago, and how happy we are to have you back. But before we begin with the proceedings, I will invite Mr. Tiant Holloway, one of our honors program students, class of 18, to give us an invocation. And the program will just go rapidly as it is printed. And I might have to be a teacher today and give people time. But I want to come back after the invocation and introduce our dais, and then we'll begin.
May you all please stand. Bow your heads to your hearts and meditate on these words. God of our ancestors, on whose shoulders we stand, God who has brought us this far on the way, we are grateful for the journeys we overcame and the errors in history we endured and survived because of your sufficient grace and unconditional love. God, our protector, lead us not into temptation and deliver us from evil. This world with its corruption and immorality does not believe in evil and has turned their faces from you. But let us, your peculiar people, not be tempted to do the same. Lead us not into the temptation of mediocrity and deliver us from the evil of aimlessness. Guide us in the path of excellence. Do not let us be afraid of failure. Teach us through our failures so that we may become distinct and reputable. Sharpen us to be our best selves. And do not let those around us remain complicit while we suffer in our self-destruction, mediocrity, lack of ambition, low self-esteem, and procrastination. But put in their spirits to help and encourage us when we are in need. Lead us not into the temptation of arrogance and deliver us from the evil of forgetting where we came from. Bring to our remembrance the trials that our ancestors had to endure. Remind us that we are the prayers, thoughts, and dreams of those who suffered before us. Do not let us forget that it was the prayers of our mothers and grandmothers that got us here and carried us through. Do not forgive us as we forget to show our continuous gratitude to those who are responsible for our achievements and success. Lead us not into the temptation of moral anarchy and deliver us from the evil of impiety. Just like the world, we let the cliche of the Pentecostal Christian black church die out, but remind us, though seemingly theologically unsound, that holiness is still right. Teach us to be moral human beings with values and standards that are grounded in love. Let the educators not only equip students with tools to become better students and intellectuals, but let them also teach us to be better persons. Let us sympathize with the people of First Baptist in Texas just as much as we sympathize with the members of Mother Emanuel in South Carolina. God, take our souls, let us feel like you. Take our minds, let us think like you. Take our hearts, let us love like you. And take our lives, let us live like you. And also, transcendent, immanent, and eternal Spirit, let us not be tempted to invite you to places you have never left. You are already here. Where can we go from your Spirit, or where can we flee from your presence? If we ascend into heaven, you are there. If we make our bed in hell, you are there. If we enter this sacred space named after your servant King without a thought of your presence, you are already here. And finally, let us not be tempted in making requests without remembering that our prayers were already thought of before we were thought of. In other words, it's already done. So as we pray for forgiveness, let us know that we are already forgiven. As we pray for healing, let us know that we are already healed. As we pray for love, let us know that we are already loved. And as some of us pray to walk from this stage to the next stage, from this door to that door, from learner to learned, from enrolled to graduate, as we continue to achieve our purpose for being here at this institution, let us know that we are already graduated. It's already done. Now we seal this prayer in your many names. So be it, and so it is. Amen.
Thank you, Tiant. From my left, we have Tiant Holloway that you just heard from, Cameron Hill, who is the president of our Honors Program Association, Dr. Paul Wiebe, former director of the Honors Program and a member of the English Department faculty. We have Ann Watts, who is one of our founders. You'll hear more about her, and former associate vice president. We have Dr. Jocelyn Jackson, one of our founders. Our interim president, Harold Martin. Dr. Ronald Sheehy, one of our founders. And we have Ken Morris of the Frederick Douglass Family Foundation, and Davon Boyd, our returning alumnus of the Honors Program, past president of the Honors Program Association, and now a student at Yale. The program will commence with Dr. Ann Winbush Watts, former vice president of academic affairs at Morehouse College, powerhouse indeed, and the person whose idea sparked the NAAAHP founding, Dr. Watts.
Good morning. I want to echo Dr. Criquet in welcoming you to Atlanta, those who have been here, who have not been here before, but especially to Morehouse College, a storied institution that has produced many great leaders through the years. We hope that while you are here, you'll get to see many of the sights, but also for a moment, chat with us and ask us questions and get to learn much, much more about a place that has produced so many great men, including our prized alumnus, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and I know that you will enjoy your stay here. Welcome, welcome to Morehouse College. Thank you.
You will now hear from our Morehouse College Glee Club Quartet.
Oh, there's plenty good room. Yes, there's plenty good room. There's plenty good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room. Yes, there's plenty good room. You just choose your seat and sit down. Oh, there's plenty good room. Yes, there's plenty good room. There's plenty good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room. Yes, there's plenty good room. You just choose your seat and sit down. I would not be a liar. I'll tell you the reason why. 'Cause if my Lord, he should call on me, no, I wouldn't be ready to die. Oh, there's plenty good room. Yes, there's plenty good room. There's plenty good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room. Yes, there's plenty good room. You just choose your seat and sit down. I would not be a backslider. I'll tell you the reason why. 'Cause if my Lord, he should call on me, no, I wouldn't be ready to die. Oh, there's plenty good room. Yes, there's plenty good room. There's plenty good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room. Yes, there's plenty good room. You just choose your seat and sit down. Oh, there's plenty good room. Yes, there's plenty good room. Plenty good room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room. Yes, there's plenty good room. You just choose your seat and sit down. You just choose your seat and sit down. You just choose your seat and sit down.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Cameron Hill, a junior English major communications minor from Jacksonville, Florida, and today I have the pleasure of introducing President Harold Martin, Jr. President Martin is an alumnus of Morehouse College. He graduated summa cum laude in 2002, earning a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Business Administration while also being recognized as the class valedictorian. He was also a part of our very own Morehouse College Honors Program. After completing his undergraduate studies, Martin went on to earning his Master's of Business Administration from Harvard Business School and finally earning his Juris Doctor degree from Yale Law School. After graduating, President Martin never abandoned Durham Morehouse. He continued his efforts by continuing to be an active member of the Morehouse College community through his efforts on the Board of Trustees after being invited to join in 2014. This took place after successfully launching a pro bono consulting project which was designed to develop the college's strategic plan in 2011. Martin has served on several committees while a part of the Board of Trustees, as well as many ad hoc committees. Most recently, in April of 2017, Martin was elected the Secretary of the Board of Trustees. He soon resigned from the position to take on the duties and serve as the new interim president of Morehouse College. Outside of Morehouse College, President Martin has spent more than a decade working as a consultant in the areas of business, finance, and higher education. In addition to that, he served as an associate partner at McKinsey & Company, where he helped academic institutions solve complex strategic, financial, and organizational challenges. Since leaving McKinsey & Company in the fall of 2014, Martin has successfully built an independent consulting practice and private investment firm in Atlanta. President Harold Martin now lives in Atlanta with his wife, Kirsten, and their two twin toddlers, Harold III and Serena Martin. Now, please join me in giving a warm welcome to President Harold Martin. Thank you. Thank you.
before I get started, I'm going to ask a personal favor from two groups. One is, if you're sitting in the last 10 rows of the chapel, I ask you to stand up and move closer to the front. I'll wait until that happens. If you are in the last 10 rows of the chapel, to stand up and move closer to the front. Let's move fast. The second group is, while that's happening, I want to ask members of our staff to walk back, position yourselves at that 10th row, and anybody who's still sitting there, I want you to bring them to my office after Crown Forum. Let's move. Brothers, I appreciate your leadership and your cooperation. Before I start my remarks related to today's program, which I'm incredibly excited about, I want to address an issue that I'm certainly not excited about, concerned about, and we take very seriously, but I want you to hear it from me. As our students know and our visitors may not, over the last 24 hours, there's been a trending hashtag on Twitter called "We Know What You Did." That hashtag on its surface is an effort to call out individual students related to allegations of sexual violence. Underlying that hashtag is clearly a belief that there's a population that does not feel heard on this very important issue in the AUC and on our campus. I spent several hours last night reading every single tweet. I'm not on Twitter, so that required people sending me every single tweet. But I read every single tweet. I have a son who will be 3 years old December 15th. I have a daughter who will be 3 years old December 15th. If either my son or my daughter came to me with allegations of sexual violence or harassment, I would take it unbelievably seriously, would investigate and hold whoever was responsible fully accountable. I have that same belief here. At the same time, if my son or my daughter was accused of sexual assault or sexual harassment, I would show them the due respect and compassion of not jumping to judgment, fully investigating, and not making any decisions before I had all of the facts. I also believe that here. I share that just so it's clear to you that we take it seriously, and also the mindset of the leader who will be responsible for directing those efforts. We know sexual violence and sexual harassment continue to be rampant in our workplaces and on our college campuses, particularly among people who feel immune to justice. So I'm not so naive as to believe that that's not the case in the AUC or that it's not the case at Morehouse College. So we will do the work. Nobody's come by my office, but I hope you will. We've not engaged in the dialogue fully, but I intend that we will. But there are three things that will certainly be a core part of what we do. The first is we will take seriously our commitment to educating the young men on our campus about sexual harassment, sexual violence, and consent. The second is we will encourage, protect people who feel that they have been violated by any member of our campus community, encouraging them and inviting them to come forward and participate in a formal process. And third, just like I said I would if it were my own son or daughter, we will fully investigate it, and if there's any wrongdoing, we'll be held fully accountable. That's all I want to say about that. It's also going to be the last time that anybody defaces the chapel on our campus. But we will do the work on this important issue. Is that clear? All right. So I am excited to be here for a lot of reasons. One, I'm excited to walk on our campus every single day. As our students well know, I graduated from the college 15 years ago, and for the last several months, it's just a blessing to me every time I walk past the security, drive past the security booth in the morning. I'm also excited to welcome our visitors from the National Association of African American Honors Programs. We're grateful that you are here to celebrate with us and with your leader, Dr. Krike, who's also the leader of our honors program. I'm also excited because today we're also recognizing the founders of the honors program, Dr. Ron Shihai and Dr. Jocelyn Jackson. It's important to note that Dr. Jackson was the honors program director when I was here as a member of the honors program. She was also my freshman English professor. So any improvement in writing and critical thinking is certainly a testament to her education of my time at Morehouse. On a personal note, I came to Morehouse 19 years ago from North Carolina as a freshman in the honors program. I was a good student, not great. I was a student leader, reasonably articulate, like many of you. But I knew deep down that I was not bringing my best every day. I also grew up loving to read autobiographies. And these men who lived not for themselves but for other people set such an incredibly high bar for impact. And I knew that what they had, I did not have. I was particularly enamored with Dr. King's speeches, his facility with the English language, his mastery of American and world history, his deep understanding of religious and philosophical teachings, his disciplined application of nonviolence, his self-awareness, his ability to speak truth to power, whether black, white, educated, or not. And his unique self-awareness at such a young age to know where he fit in the broad arc of justice for people of color in this country. During new student orientation, as I walked into our campus and sat in this chapel looking for what I knew I did not have, our president, Dr. Massey, articulated a blueprint for what it meant to be a Morehouse man. A Morehouse man is a scholar, a Morehouse man is a leader, a Morehouse man is a servant, and a Morehouse man is a man of God. And I knew that I had found a home on our campus that would set the expectations for how I would lead and have impact for the rest of my career and life. Last night, I spent some time reflecting on the theme of this conference, and I'll be brief. The honors mindset, a legacy of social justice. You see, I knew without talking to Dr. Krike about it that this honors mindset was not about being a member of the honors program. The point is that this mindset is critical to social justice, and social justice doesn't happen without leaders who bring this mindset. It was at Morehouse that I began to think deeply about what social justice meant. Racial equality, gender equality, voter enfranchisement. Simply and perhaps crudely, social justice is defined as a fundamental concept of fair and just relationship between individuals and our society. More plainly, it's ensuring that individuals are treated fairly and justly by the institutions empowered to guide our society, our governments, our schools, our criminal justice system, our corporations, and our media. As I studied King and Mays and Thurman and Maynard and H.J. Russell and others who fought and sacrificed for the equal treatment of the disenfranchised, I came to understand that a practitioner of social justice understands a myriad of academic disciplines: philosophy, psychology, world history, literature, religion, economics, urban studies, sociology, and the list goes on. But this interdisciplinary education that certainly men of Morehouse and members of the honors programs nationally have is just table stakes. So I wanted to think more deeply about what is it about this honors mindset that's so critical to successfully pursuing social justice. I want to pause for a moment and talk about what I mean by social justice. What I don't mean is social media posts for likes that represent the most superficial of thinking. What I don't mean is protests non-strategic with no end in mind. And what I don't mean is emails with fancy titles of organizations with names that you made up. What I mean is a disciplined, enduring, leadership-oriented commitment that's steeped in the intellectual and academic ideals of the opportunities that you have been afforded. It is my belief that social justice needs this honors mindset. And again, that this honors mindset is critical to the effective pursuit of social justice. So I want to share 3 insights that you should already know that I came to when I was a student at Morehouse that were insightful to me. And again, my background was reading autobiographies, and what I saw were leaders who thought more deeply than I thought, led more effectively than I led, spoke in more impressive ways than I spoke, could write in ways that I never thought could be possible for someone who looked like me. And when I came to Morehouse at 17, I was ever mindful that at 26, Dr. King was tapped in Montgomery, Alabama to lead the Montgomery bus boycott. And later that day would speak to churches that would launch that movement. So I want to share 3 insights I came to, many of which in this chapel at the college. The first is that an honors mindset does not accept limitations or make excuses that constrain your success. It seems obvious that you can't advance the cause of others if you're too busy constraining your own advancement. You said we know Dr. Mays to have led our college for 27 years, generally known as the intellectual father of Dr. King, leader of the NAACP and the World Council of Churches, advisor of presidents, first African-American leader of the Atlanta Board of Education, ultimately desegregating those schools. What you may not know is that Dr. Mays was born in a small town you never heard of in South Carolina. He was the youngest of 8 children. His parents were tenant farmers and former slaves. His father never supported his pursuit of education, and his greatest supporter, his mother, could read nor write. Let me put it in language that may be more clear. Dr. Mays was a first-generation college student. Howard Thurman, well known as author, theologian, educator, and civil rights leader, wrote more than 20 books, was known to have mentored Dr. King, without whom any of these men, there would be no civil rights movement, there would be no successful pursuit of social justice during the 20th century. But Dr. Thurman's father died when he was 7. Howard Thurman's father died when he was 7. But it was in that chapel library that Dean Carter shared with me that despite his challenges, when he came to Morehouse, he purportedly read every single book in the library. Why do I share this? So when I talk to young men on our campus or in my office, you may not always have the money you need. Things may not all be sweet at home. Parents may be going through a divorce. Father passed away. First time anyone in your family even thought about going to college. And what you don't know is I think about Mays, and I think about Thurman. And the only difference between you and them is the mental, emotional, and spiritual resolve to decide to pursue the excellence required to pursue this honors mindset that I'm describing. The second takeaway I came to when I was at this college was that an honors mindset is intellectually prepared and disciplined, leaning fully on your own education. I vividly remember the first time I read a letter from a Birmingham jail. And of course, everyone knows and it's easy to state injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But have you read that letter? I think if you read the letter, you come to the same conclusion I did, which is how did a young man sitting in a prison, no Wikipedia, no reference books, no friends to call, not enough paper, write such a cogent articulation that defended his position? Well, the way it happened was he stayed ready. He didn't wait for the moment, I need more time. Just like with the Montgomery bus boycott, he was ready when he was called upon in that moment. The other thing that I took away from this is that Dr. King clearly articulated his basic steps of a nonviolent campaign. These steps defined how he approached protests in every city on every issue since. What he said was there are 4 steps. Step number 1 is you collect the facts to determine whether an injustice exists. Step number 2 is you negotiate. Step number 3 is you go through a process of self-purification. And step number 4 is you pursue direct action. Now, more than 50 years later, we see too many so-called advocates who skipped to number 4, haven't done step 1 and do the work to gather the facts, haven't pursued negotiation to have impact with the institutions that actually move the needle on the issue that you're passionate about, and they lack the emotional and spiritual resolve to go through a process of self-purification. Well, this same man that was doing that at less than 30 years old went to Morehouse College. So no one will ever convince me that that excellence and that capacity and that greatness doesn't sit in every single one of you and every single one of us. So the question is, given what you're passionate about, would you be ready today? And if you're not ready today, like Thurman, what do you need to read? Like Mays, how many sermons do you need to give? Like King, how deeply do you need to think about the interdisciplinary connections of topics that, frankly, no one before and no one since has connected towards social justice in the way that he did? And finally, an honors mindset does not quit until the job is done. You see, it was on this stage during Crown Forum when I was a student that Nelson Mandela spoke to the group, spoke to our students. And I left just enamored by this man who had spent more than 27 years in prison, his whole life fighting for justice, and had not an ounce of resentment. I would read his books and listen to his speeches, and I still do. I want to give you a little context for those of you who know the name but not the story. Nelson Mandela fought for the liberation of South Africa during a period of apartheid. He joined the African National Congress in 1944 and developed its youth league. In 1952, 8 years later, he was sentenced to prison for 9 months under the Suppression of Communism Act, certainly an unjust law. Later, he was arrested for illegally leaving the country and inciting workers to strike, and he was sentenced to 5 more years in prison. Ultimately, in 1963, he was convicted of sabotage and sentenced to life imprisonment. Most of that time he spent at Robben Island. While facing the death penalty, he famously said to the court, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. The next day, he was sentenced to life in prison. During his imprisonment, his mother died. His oldest son died. He had prostate surgery. 3 separate occasions, he was offered conditional release that he rejected. Not until 27 years later, in 1990, would he vote in his first election in South Africa, ultimately being inaugurated as the first duly elected Democratic president of the nation. Through all of that, he never answered racism with racism. He remained devoted to democracy and equality, and his dream was ultimately fulfilled. This man had the Constitution to work diligently for decades for what he believed in, ultimately willing to die for it. That's not to mean you be unduly patient. But I think about Mandela when I get an email from a student that says, I emailed you yesterday, I haven't heard back. I think about Mandela when we think about how we advance our college into the future. We didn't get here overnight, we won't get there overnight. But if you work diligently, if you endure the challenges, you endure the pain, you continue to strengthen your mental and physical and spiritual and emotional resolve toward the aim of social justice that you are committed to, you will get there. So if you're passionate about law, I want to ask you to stand up. My hope for you is that you will make social justice a part of your career, not just a fancy law firm with a big salary, but you will always be a ready ear to a member of our community who doesn't have access to an attorney, and you'll be willing to be helpful, that you will create programs in our communities that ensure equal access to justice among people who look like us. You remain standing. If you're passionate about health care, I want you to stand up. Whether your goal is to be a physician, a dentist, public health professional, or researcher, my hope is that you take the education that you have at Morehouse and you think deeply not only about your own professional advancement, but how you can use your experiences to ensure that there aren't children in our communities who aren't educated about their health needs, that as policies are being made at the hospitals or dental practices or academic institutions you work at, that those decisions aren't made ignorant to the challenges of our community that we know we're a part of, regardless of how we grew up. If you're excited about business, please stand up. Stay standing. If you choose to work at a corporation, you make sure they hire people who look like us. You make sure they advance people who look like us. Hope you'll make sure they mentor people who look like us. If you decide to build a business, I hope you'll be wildly successful, but then come back and find other people who want to participate in the wealth that you've enjoyed and teach them how to do it. Because the reality is you're getting experiences now and you'll continue to get experiences over your career that as we all pursue social justice with this honors mindset, never giving up, doing the work, it's going to take leaders like you to make the difference. If you're excited about public policy or media or education or the Black church, I ask you to stand. And by the way, if you're not passionate about anything, again, you're welcome to come by my office and we can spend some time together, because the reality is you'll never make anything of yourself or contribute meaningfully to this work towards social justice unless you're on fire with a passion inside your belly toward making a difference in some specific way. As you know, we have much work to do, and we have much work to do in all areas. So in some ways, I think about Dr. or Howard Thurman's quote where he says, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs is more people who have come alive. So toward the topic of social justice, we have so much work to do in all areas that we don't need you to figure out, well, where do we need you most? Point is, we need you in the place where you're most passionate. So while you're still standing, I want to ask another favor. Sitting behind me, Dr. Jocelyn Jackson and Dr. Ron Shihai had the foresight 26 years ago to found the National Association of African American Honors Programs. I'm particularly indebted to Dr. Jackson because after our president, Dr. Massey, articulated the academic expectations of a Morehouse man, what she may not know is that she was the personification and ideal of intellectual excellence that I pursued. I wanted to write like her, think like her, talk like her. I wanted to be able to use the words that she used and actually know what they meant. So while you're standing, what I want to ask you to do is we're going to present some awards for them because we know how many men they've trained and inspired and encouraged along the way. And I want you to give them a round of applause to thank you for all that they've done.
We are presenting our founders with a commemorative art work that was done by Cynthia St. James prematurely because the original will be unveiled tomorrow evening. But the title of it is called Honors Mindset. And it shows honor students in the hard work that they do, robotics, computer technology, healthcare, lab work, calculus, etc. We thank the two of you so much. Without you, we would not be here today. You may be seated. Thank you, Dr. Martin, for that inspirational message. Sounds like a man from an honors program, does he not? We have a challenge because the Crown Forum is a class, and at 11:50, I'm looking at the clock and it's not been set from daylight savings time. We have to stop so that Morehouse students can be checked in for attendance. It is mandatory that Morehouse students check in for attendance, but that does not mean everybody has to leave. So I'm going to stop right now and allow Morehouse students who have some attendance effort to do to be excused to do that. I don't know what your procedure is, but we hate for you to go.
I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing our speaker for this morning, Mr. Kenneth B. Morris, Jr. Mr. Morris is the president of the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, a public charity that endeavors to create a modern abolitionist movement in schools all over the country through the vehicle of service learning curricula called History, Human Rights, and the Power of One. Some of the work done by Mr. Morris and the foundation since 2008 range from reaching approximately 60,000 middle and high school students through the Frederick Douglass Dialogues Tour, appearing on television, radio, and in newspaper articles, including CNN, Newsweek Video, PBS, NPR, the Tavis Smiley Show, and other medium forms, creating the Abolition Day Project, allowing students to bring awareness of human trafficking to millions of people all over the United States, and including H.R. 929, the House resolution to recognize Abolition Day internationally, as well as the work of Frederick Douglass and FDFI towards ending slavery. So I invite you to please stand and welcome our venerated speaker to deliver our conference charge, Mr. Kenneth B. Morris, Jr.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Devon, for that very kind introduction. It is an honor to be with you this morning on this historic campus in this historic chapel and with these dignitaries up on the stage with me. I am the great-great-great-grandson of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass. And I'm also the great-great-grandson of the great educator Booker T. Washington. Now, when people meet me for the first time, the question that I get often is, well, Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington were not related to each other. How is it you're related to both of them? Well, I'd like to ask my mother to stand up, who lives here in Atlanta, Nettie Washington Douglass. And the way it happened was on her side. Her father, Frederick Douglass III, was Frederick Douglass's great-grandson. And her mother, Nettie Hancock Washington, was Booker T. Washington's granddaughter. And my grandparents, her parents, met on the campus of Tuskegee Institute in 1941. They happened to be on campus the same day, and they were rushing across to get to the other side, and they literally bumped into each other, didn't know that the other descended from an historic family, and they fell in love at first sight and wound up getting married 3 months later. And as a father of 2 daughters, I don't recommend that. But it was truly a love story, and my mother, Nettie, is the product of that union of those 2 historic families. You know, whenever I introduce myself and I say I'm the great, 5 greats, that's a whole lot of greats. Not only is it a mouthful trying to spit out all of those greats, but it sometimes makes me feel very far removed. And you may be sitting there having a hard time trying to imagine what my connection is to Douglass and Washington. It's like trying to picture what $1 billion looks like with all of those zeros. But many people know a grandparent or knew a grandparent. Some of you may have even known a great-grandparent. Well, that's how close I feel to both of my ancestors, because you see, my great-grandmother, Fanny Douglass, to whom I was very close, she lived to be 103 years old. And she met Frederick Douglass when she was a little girl right here in Atlanta. And my Aunt Portia, to whom I was also very close, was Booker T. Washington's daughter. And she lived to be 95 years old. And I remember being a little boy and sitting on my great-grandmother Fanny Douglass's lap as she would tell me what it was like to know, as she would call him, the man with the great big white hair. And I remember sitting on my Aunt Portia's lap, and she would tell me firsthand stories about her father. And when I stopped to think that hands that actually touched the great Frederick Douglass and hands that touched the great Booker T. Washington also touched mine. In a sense, even with all of those greats, I can say I stand just one person away from history. And I stand one person away from slavery. We're not that far removed from the history of slavery in this country. Both of my ancestors were born into slavery. They were born into the most horrific conditions that a human being could be subjected to, but yet through the power of education, they both understood from a very young age that education was going to be their pathway to freedom. And as we know, it was illegal to teach an enslaved person to read and write, and Frederick Douglass never spent one day of his life in a classroom. He was a self-taught scholar. And when people would see him later in life, This man that was the first African-American nominated for Vice President of the United States, the first African-American ambassador and Consul General to Haiti, the first African-American U.S. Marshal, the first African-American Recorder of Deeds in the District of Columbia. And they would ask Frederick, they'd say, "Where did you go to school? Where did you get your education?" And he would respond by saying, "My degree is written on my back." Now, Frederick had something that happened in his life around 8 or 9 years old that he called divine providence in his favor. And that was, he was chosen from among all of the slave children on the plantation on the eastern shore of Maryland, where he had been born, to go to Baltimore to be the house servant for his master's brother-in-law. He was going to be in the big city. So he was moving from an environment where he couldn't have learned to read and write to the big city where he was going to be around poor white children, and he was going to be around free black children that knew how to read and write. But when he got there, what happened most importantly was that his slave mistress, Sophia, had never had a slave before. And she saw this bright boy, and she began to teach Frederick his ABCs. But when her husband found out about it, when Frederick's master found out about it, he got angry, and he forbade it. And he looked at his wife, Sophia, and he looked at young Frederick, and he said, "You cannot teach a slave how to read and write, because if you do, it will unfit him to be a slave." Did you all hear that message? It will unfit him to be a slave. And so Frederick looked at his master and he said, if you don't want me to have this, I'm going to do everything in my power to gain it. And he understood right then and there that knowledge is power, and again, education would be his key to freedom, his pathway to freedom. And that is a message that is as relevant today. And as I've traveled around the country and worked with young people, mostly at the secondary school level, I come into contact with a lot of young people that I would describe are in mental bondage. And you all, as honors students, understand the importance of education and the great work that you're already doing around social justice issues and the mentoring you're doing of young people. You are a tangible example to a young person that is living in mental bondage that education could be their pathway to freedom. And so Frederick, when he got that little spark of light, he begins to teach himself to read and write. And as he's freeing his mind from mental bondage, he's starting to ask critical questions about his condition. Questions like, why am I a slave? And why do you own me? And then he looks to God and he says, God, do you mean for me to be a slave for life? Because my master puts on a suit every Sunday, goes to church, and in the Word and in the Bible finds justification to come back to brutalize, dehumanize, rape, pillage, and plunder his property. I can't wrap my mind around what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing. And one of the first books that Frederick reads when he teaches himself to read is the Bible. And in the Bible, he finds that God does not mean for him to be a slave for life, and that God loves him. So fast forward, because of in the interest of time, he would go on to unfit himself to be a slave, and at the age of 20, disguise himself as a sailor and carried with him some papers, and he would escape slavery in 1838. He would go by train and by boat to New York City, where he would call for my great-great-great-grandmother Anna. They would get married. They would stay married, by the way, for 44 years until she passed away. Then they would move along the Underground Railroad up to New Bedford, Massachusetts. Frederick would attend an anti-slavery meeting that was being held by the white abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison heard that he had this fugitive slave in the audience, and he asked Frederick to just stand up. Will you tell the story? Will you tell the audience what it was like to be enslaved? And so he stands up, and he said that he was nervous, that he was shaking from every limb. But what he did was he had the gift of communication. He was eloquent. He was charismatic. He was theatrical. And he told the public exactly what it was like to be enslaved, and he really was the first time that could communicate the inhumanity in a way that nobody before him had ever done. And so it pushed the abolitionist movement forward. He continues with Garrison and the Garrisonians, and he goes from town to town, city to city, to just tell the audience what it was like to be enslaved. And then he had a problem. People started to doubt that he had ever been enslaved. They couldn't wrap their minds around what those that were pro-slavery and what the federal government had said about enslaved Africans, that they were not worthy of freedom or citizenship. they were better off in slavery. Listen to the songs that they sing. They're happy, they're amiable. And then this man stands up and he shatters that notion, and people cannot wrap their minds around what they're seeing and what they're hearing and what they've been taught. So they started calling him a fraud. So in order to prove that he had been enslaved, he writes his first autobiography, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, which was published in 1847. He was 27 years old, only 7 years removed from slavery, and he writes a classic piece of literature that the Library of Congress named one of the 88 books that shaped America. And in it, he named names and he named places. Well, then he had another problem, and that was it became a bestseller. He became an instant celebrity and a household name. And that's the last thing that you want, is the notoriety of a best-selling book when you're on the run from your master. So he would go to Europe for a couple of years as a cooling off period, and while he was there, his abolitionist friends pooled their money together and purchased his freedom from his master for $711, and he returned back to the United States and then went on to do his important abolitionist work. His bicentennial is next year in February 2018, and our organization has printed a special edition, bicentennial edition of his narrative, and we're going to give away 1 million copies to young people by the end of 2018. And we're very honored that Brian Stevenson, who will be speaking to you, I believe, tomorrow. Brian is the founder and CEO of the Equal Justice Initiative out of Montgomery, Alabama. He's the leading voice around the issue of mass incarceration, prison industrial complex, and he wrote the introduction to this book, and it's a powerful introduction. He talked about what Frederick would have been up against in 1845 as a fugitive slave, looking at this legal institution of slavery, and how do you go about dismantling that? And then he draws a direct line through hundreds of years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal, housing discrimination, Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, all the way up to this legal institution of slavery that we call mass incarceration. So we're very proud of this book. We've got books here for the honor students to be able to take away from this conference. But what I would like, I see you clapping, that's good, that you're excited. But the charge that I would like to leave you with as we head out of here this morning is a paragraph, the closing paragraph from Brian's introduction. And Brian writes, Frederick Douglass wrote that, quote, education means emancipation. It means light and liberty. It means the uplifting of the soul of man into the glorious light of truth, the light by which men can only be made free, end quote. Then Brian writes, we're living at a time when we need the glorious light of truth, people who are willing to stand when others say sit down. We need people committed to equality who will speak when others say be quiet. It can be difficult to know how to face some of these overwhelming challenges. Let the words and life of Frederick Douglass show you the way. History lives in each of us. History doesn't just live in me because I descend from two people that we've heard of, but history lives in each and every one of you. Each and every one of you descends from somebody that made a difference, may have sacrificed and given of their lives just so that we can even sit in a classroom and get an education, may have given of their lives just so that we can enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy today. I had a 10-year-old girl say to me about a year ago when we were talking about Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, and she said, Mr. Morris, I researched my family tree and I found that my four greats grandmother was born into slavery. She taught herself to read and write in secret, and then she ran away and freed herself. She became a businesswoman and an unlikely philanthropist. And she said, so do you know what that means? And before I had a chance to answer, she said, it means I have greatness flowing through my veins, just like you do. We all have greatness flowing through our veins, and history lives in each of us. But the future depends on how we carry that forward. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate your staying with us through this wonderful program. And I appreciate the charge that Ken Morris gave us. I want you to carry that torch, that light forward as we deliberate and engage with each other for the rest of the weekend. Now we will conclude our program. We generally conclude our program with the singing of the Morehouse hymn, but because I had to dismiss the Morehouse students, we could not do that. So you missed that fabulous treat. Oh, no, excuse me, sorry. My honor students who uphold the tradition will engage in the closing with the Morehouse hymn. It's on the back of your program. Gentlemen, do you want to come up on stage and let's show them how we do it? Don't forget us.
Ties more.